having a conversation with my brother recently, and we were talking about naturally this topic, thinking better, all this stuff. And he framed the question to me, which makes perfect sense, and almost is crazy to think that I don't think he's ever asked me it before, and I've never really thought about it directly, I think. But the idea was we were talking about, how do you scale something like this? If you believe there's value in thinking this way and trying to think better, which I think a lot of people would agree, how do you scale that? How do you start to teach other people to do that? How do you convince them that this is a skill that's worthwhile? And what he asked me was, what did it for you? You seemingly weren't always like this. What turned you into this? And I don't think I've ever thought of it directly in that way before. Probably because of a little bit of like an overinflated sense of self. I thought I always had some aspect of this. It's just kind of the way I was born. And there might be some truth to that. And there's certainly something about how we were raised that I think enabled some questioning and critical thinking. So I think that's true. If I'm being really honest, though, when I think about my earlier life, like early 20s, I questioned, but I did it at a very low level way, right? We've talked about there's levels to this. It wasn't a sophisticated level of questioning. It was more of that blind. If I hear something that doesn't align with what I believe or the view I have on the world, I'll question that for sure. And I'm pretty good at being litigious about that and debating somebody. And I assumed that meant I was a good thinker. And again, there's some value in that. But the true questioning, the questioning of my own thoughts, the questioning of the things that seem certain to me, having the entertaining the possibility that those things might have been wrong or worth questioning was nowhere on my radar. So back to what my brother asked me, what converted you? The answer is pretty apparent once I think about it. I went to business school when I was, I believe I was 23 or 24 when I first went. I think it was 24. So relatively young, and that's kind of what I say in my earlier 20s, pre-business school and even going to business school, thought more in the way I just said. Where I went to business school at HBS, it was, and this is part of the reason I went there, or a big part of the reason, is it was almost entirely the case method in how it was taught. So meaning you would read a case on a topic, a set of facts, a bunch of information, and then you would get to class and it would be the professor more or less just asking questions of the class of why do you think, the CEO in the case did this, and do you think that was a good decision, and how would you have analyzed this? Very much putting you in the shoes of what we'd call the protagonist in the case and trying to think like them. That intrigued me. I liked the idea of learning that way. Again, I in my head, I liked the idea of questioning and debate. So to me, this fell right in there. I'd sat in on a couple classes and, people are sharing their views and people are kind of going back and forth. And I was like, yeah, this is great. And in many ways, I probably thought, even though I was a bit humbled to be at HBS and recognized there's a lot of smart people there, part of me thought, yeah, I'll show them what I got. I'll show them when we get into these discussions and debates, this intellectual capacity I have. It didn't take long for me to be there, to start sitting through those cases. And I should say the first year there is interesting because you're with the same 90 people for every class for the first year. The teachers rotate in and out, but the class it's called your section, is the same 90 people. So I say that because you start to develop relationships, you start to get a pretty in-depth understanding of how people think, and you spend a lot of time with people. So it's not one-off interactions. And so we would sit for hours a day for a year, reviewing cases with our teachers, and there was marketing cases, there was business ethics, there was leadership, finance, right? All different topics. But as I said, it was just an open discussion of people. It was guided by a really well-trained professor, but it was open discussion of talking through decisions that were made, ways of thinking. And again, it didn't take long for me to start to do that, to recognize there's more value in me listening here than there is speaking. I don't know that was an active thought early on, but I know I did not speak in class nearly as much as I would have thought I did. Now, part of that was just dynamic. Most people, 90 people, you don't all get to speak every class, but even the compulsion to speak, after a couple weeks, it started to die down. There was a recognition that perhaps that's not the best idea. And honestly, it was a little bit unnatural at first. I tried to filter that through the lens that I would normally filter things. I tried to kind of look around the room with the other 90 people, and they had me a little bit staggered because there was lots of different views, things I hadn't thought of, smart people making valid points, and it was tough for me to process that. That wasn't the norm, and that's kind of not what I expected. I expected to be well positioned to kind of quote unquote dominate a room. So as I was kind of trying to process that, I tried to do it in the way of judging people, frankly. People that were making certain points, I tried to find holes or weaknesses and say, that guy's just like a cocky, arrogant investment banker or whatever he is. And like, yeah, he's smart, but he doesn't really get it. Or that person's like super idealistic and think everything is super simple and has the answer, right? And I tried to do that for a little while. That was my natural, I think, instinct. That was probably my mind trying to defend the identity I had and trying to say like, hey, you're still smarter than these people. You're still better. It's just coming off like you're not, but here's the reasons why. But again, in that type of setting where it's, 2-3 classes a day, 5 days a week, nonstop, it's almost an assault on your mind and the way in which you think. Right? If it's more of a transactional one-off thing or a little bit here or there, I'd taken case method classes in college, but it was a class here, a class there, and it wasn't the same people all year long. Your mind can figure that out. It can understand how to keep you on the path you want to be on, keeping the identity you want to keep. But when it's bombarded in that way, in a consistent way, you can't. It almost forces you to break out of that. And that's what started to happen for me. I started to recognize like, hey, there's something to this. There's something to being forced to do something I never did naturally in my own mind. Being forced to sit, have a view on a topic, right? Because I always loved academics. So I read every case, I prepped it, I was ready, I had my views, I had my points. When I was called on, I was ready to speak. I had things I wanted to share. But the nature of it was, I would go into the class with my views. All right, I feel like I understand this case. I know what I would do, what the answer would be. And then the class would start. And, a few people would start speaking, and then 10 people, 15 people. And now they're saying things again that I didn't think about. They're questioning assumptions that I didn't think to question. They're challenging things I thought or would have said in ways that I didn't even think you could do. So the things I like to do now for myself, which is do all that internally, it was modeled for me initially externally by all these different people. And again, they're coming from different countries, different age groups, different backgrounds, different career paths. There was doctors in there were politicians, there were obviously business people, but some people that had been in big corporations for a lot of time, people in startups, people in finance. You have all these different diverse ways of thinking being just shot at you left and right. And I guess in theory you could shut down from that. But for me, luckily, maybe because of the way I thought, or I don't know, I don't more time to spend on that, but it resulted in me saying like, this is better. My thoughts are better now, right? That defenses started to slip away, trying to protect myself and protect my identity and prove that the thing I thought was better than all these other things people were saying, that went away. And it became very apparent that if I jumped on the train here, kind of metaphorically, and use this to help me think better, that was a way better outcome. So don't fight it. Don't look to prove everybody wrong. Take it all in. Like, make the objective truth. Don't make these things as competing ideas. Make these as just more inputs that are going to help me think about it better. And there was a humbling that happened there too. I mentioned because the people were so smart, and there were numerous instances where I was just flat out wrong the way I was thinking about it. Like, I totally missed aspects of the case, and being forced to see that and that humility that came with it to eventually, and that probably took a little bit longer, but as I say, to eventually get to a point where when that happened, to be like, oh, yeah, that happened again. Look at that. I missed it. Okay. Why did I miss it? Let me think about that. Let me try and be better, versus being defensive. So it was almost the perfect incubator for appreciating the value of challenging your views, appreciating and seeing it modeled how to think differently, how to just have a totally different perspective that you might not naturally think about because you see somebody who just comes from a totally different place having that totally different perspective. And then, as importantly, developing the humility of just time after time seeing it happen enough where, like, hey, I can admit I was wrong here. There's a better way. Having the humility to accept it and roll with it and make it all part of these inputs that are getting you. The end game isn't to dominate the class or to have the best idea. The end game is to just try and get closer to the truth, try and get better perspective. And that allowed you to do that. So that's really what worked for me. That's what got me on this path. Again, it was pretty clear to me after 2 years of that, because it was 2 years at business school, the way I fundamentally approached life and thought was different. And that's kind of where this thing was born. It took a few years for it to kind of formulate and become something that I actively pursued. But that's what did it. So, it made us start to think, and I'll end on this, what can you leverage from that? What are the takeaways? If you did want to teach other people that, how would you do it? And there's probably some themes in there around the consistency of it, the diversity of it, the modeling of thinking about how you want somebody to do it on their own, of challenging their thoughts, in diverse ways, the forced humility. Some of those themes start to pop up, and I think maybe you can apply those going forward of how you might teach others to think better.